Hi everyone, my name is Austin and I'm 17 years old, and I want to tell you my incredible story. When I was at school, I was a typical nerd and a bookworm. I had a great IQ and was a bright student, but I was also hated and heavily bullied by our school football team. They could not stand me. When I got into high school, I fell in love with Emily, the best looking girl in our class. Every guy in our class wanted to get her out on a date. Once, during the biology class, the teacher asked Emily what she knew about giraffes. Emily said, "You'd better ask Austin. He's one of them. He also has a long neck and he's constantly chewing on something." The whole class burst into laughter at this joke. And for me, it was just so humiliating. Well, time passed, and this incident was finally forgotten. One day, I got all of my courage and went up straight to Emily, who was talking to her best friend. I asked Emily to go and do homework together so that I could help her with biology or go to a cafeteria for a coffee. When she heard me, she burst into laughter and said to her friend, "Did you hear that? This loser is asking me out for a date. This is hilarious." Then she looked at me and said, "You are a giraffe indeed, as you never understand. I will never go on a date with you, and I will never stay alone with you even for a single minute." Since then, the nickname Giraffe has stuck to me forever, and I try to stay away from Emily ever since. Time passed, and I grew up and was no longer such a dogface, but I still was an introvert and a long-necked nerd. I got involved in computer games. I like to play RPG, role-playing games, and to work on strategy together with other players. All the gamers are usually hiding under a nickname. Once I met a girl named the Witch. We played on the same team and finally we became very good virtual friends. We had a lot in common. For example, we loved to read books, and we actively chatted with each other in social networks. However, we still did not know each other, neither our real names nor photos. We just enjoyed socializing and spending time together. She was just a dream girl. Once, the witch sent me a note that she really liked me and wanted to meet me in real life. I was embarrassed, and I didn't know what to say. I looked at myself in the mirror, and I felt nervous. Of course, I'm no longer the same boy with bad teeth from the 5th grade, but I'm still not that handsome. I hesitated for a long time, and finally, I made up my mind. I wrote to her that I agree. She then replied to me that she was very happy and gave me an address near our school cafeteria. She said she would be waiting for me at 6 p.m. and she would have a badge on her dress with her favorite online game name. So I went for my first date in life, and I felt very nervous. My heart was pounding wildly. I looked around the corner, and I immediately saw the witch at the cafeteria. The dream girl was so beautiful, and then she turned her head, and I saw her face. I couldn't believe my eyes. It was Emily. All the painful memories of how she humiliated me at school immediately came up to my mind. I was panic-stricken. I felt scared that as soon as she would recognize me, she would play another cruel joke on me. I felt over-emotional and I ran home instead. The next day, the witch wrote to me. She was very worried that I did not come and meet her, and she asked me to explain. I thought for a while whether to answer her or not, and finally, I wrote that I am very sorry that I could not come because of my family problems. I said that the police detained my sister as she stole something from the retail store. I lied as best as I could and it worked. And by the way, my sister Becca is indeed like a little evil demon, and she had quite a few police records for petty shoplifting before. I loved and hated Emily at the same time, but my love for her was getting stronger. The next day, I was flying on the wings of love. I came to school feeling happy and wanting to see Emily and talk to her. But then, all of a sudden, I saw her giving hugs to Steve Perry, our school local bully and a soccer team lead. It broke my heart. How could she write me love letters and at the same time date the most brutal and revolving guy at school? After that, I decided not to write to her anymore. I ignored her messages. She wrote me a million messages with her apologies. She honestly didn't understand why it disappeared. One day, I was sitting at home and I was thinking about Emily. Suddenly, I heard some voices by the window. One of the voices belonged to my sister, and the other was the voice of some guy. I came to the window and saw my sister and Steve Perry, the evil guy that was dating Emily. But what is he doing here in our house? I decided to follow them and find out what was going on. They talked in low, agitated voices, and then they went to Steve's car. I hid behind the trees and I followed them unnoticed so that I could see and hear them well. From their conversation, I understood that they were plotting some evil thing. They agreed to meet in half an hour at the same place, and then they walked away. I decided to find out what they were up to, and I opened the car trunk. I turned pale with fear from what I saw there. There on a trap, I saw a shovel, ropes, and adhesive tape. What was my sister up to? I decided to call the police straight away. But then, all of a sudden, I saw Steve coming back. I felt panic, and I could not think of anything better than just to jump into the car trunk and close it. There I hid under the trap and prayed to God that Steve would not look into the trunk and find me there. Luckily for me, he got into his driver's seat. Soon my sister showed up and got into the car. They started talking, and they talked about our father. Becca said that this old fool would never figure out what really happened. While she talked, it turned out that she and Steve were planning to stage Becca's kidnapping and demand a large ransom from our father. Our family is not rich, but my father has been saving money all of his life, and by now he already had a very good sum of money in his bank account. He was planning to invest it in business and to launch his own auto repair shop. As they talked, I found out that Becca had already done a similar trick before. Once she was kidnapped and my dad received an anonymous letter. The letter said that if he would not leave $5,000 in the garbage container near the Central Street crossroads at 2 o'clock, then Becca would be killed. My dad was in panic and he immediately did everything they said. So he brought the money and Becca was released free. However, now I just found out that this kidnapping was just staged and Becca herself has planned and arranged all of it. She then spent all of this money on fancy clothes and parties with her friends. I was bursting with anger. I remember how devastated my dad was back then. He almost had a heart attack. And now, together with Steve, they wanted to get an incredible $50,000 from our father. It was all the savings he had. I would never think Becca was so wicked and shameless. I was ready to yell at her and tell her everything I thought of her. I was about to climb out of the trunk and fight with her, but then Steve spoke up. He said that if someone gets up between him and the money, then this person will be screwed up. Then I heard his gun click. I was so scared that I felt speechless. A cold sweat ran down my spine. I wanted to jump out of the trunk and run away as far as I could, but then the car started and drove off, and I didn't know what to do. I was panic-stricken. What if Steve finds me here? In my imagination, I had terrifying pictures of Steve holding his fingers on the gun trigger and forcing me to dig my own grave. A few minutes later, I calmed down. I carefully started cutting a hole in the upholstery so that I could see what was happening in the passenger seat. I saw that we were driving through a forest, and then we made a turn and drove through the field. I was feeling scared that they figured out that I'm in the car trunk and they are going to get rid of me in some deserted place. We drove all day, and I just could not feel my body anymore. My legs were swollen, I was stinking, and I was very hungry. Then we stopped near some abandoned barn, and they got out of the car and went to the barn. I jumped out of the trunk. My legs were swollen. I opened the back door and I saw a half-eaten burger there. I grabbed it to fill my stomach. It was the most delicious burger in my life. Then suddenly, I saw Steve returning to the car. He forgot to take his scary tools. I quickly hid behind a tree. Steve took the ropes and the adhesive tape and walked away. I wondered what they would do with all this, and so I secretly sneaked over to the barn and peeped through the hole in the wall. Becca and Steve set up a tripod and a camera on top of it. Steve put her on a chair and tied her up, and also taped her mouth. Then he put on a mask so that no one would recognize him. Then I saw a performance that would definitely deserve the Oscar for the best actor. Steve changed his voice and he demanded a ransom for kidnapping. Then he ripped the adhesive tape off Becca's lips. She looked desperate and all in tears, and she begged her father to save her life and pay the ransom. After filming this video, they cut off a curl of her hair and put it in an envelope. Then they both burst into laughter. "This is hilarious. I wish I could see your daddy's face when he gets it. And then everything will go easy, and we'll get our money," Steve said. There was only one complication that could ruin their plans, and that was me. I was all set to tell my father and Emily about this shameless fraud. After that, Emily will definitely break up with Steve. I don't know if she will ever want to date me, but I know one thing for sure. This evil Steve will no longer mess with her. I was about to call my father, but the barn door creaked and Steve came out. I hid around the corner, and Steve put all his things in the trunk and walked back. I decided to have a quick look at what they were doing there. I looked in, and I saw a disgusting picture. My sister and Steve were kissing each other. Not only was he a rogue, but he was also a cheater. I quickly made a couple of photos that would prove Steve cheating. Then I ran into the car and jumped into the car trunk again. After a while, Steve and Becca got out of the barn and got into the car. As we drove, I was frantically thinking how to stop them. I did not have time to call my dad when we were in the barn, but now I could not do it because they would hear my voice and would get mad at me. And then I got an idea. I decided to sign into my online game chat box and send a note to the witch. I sent her 2 quick messages. "I'm in big danger. I'm hiding in the trunk of your boyfriend's car. Call the police and my dad, Mr. Johnson, immediately, and tell them that his daughter Becca and Steve Perry plan to blackmail him. Don't ask how I know all this. Just do it now. I'll explain everything to you later." Emily replied and said yes, and she did exactly what I asked. Steve and Becca were stopped on the way back home. The police cars surrounded our car and demanded Steve and Becca to get out of the car and hold their arms up. The police officers pointed their guns at them. Steve tried to reach for his pistol in the pocket, but the mustachioed sergeant said, "Don't even think about that, Sonny," and he got his gun away from him. After that, Steve and Becca were handcuffed. The police arrested them and I testified as a witness. Becca couldn't believe her ears that I had been in their car trunk all this time. Steve got a guilty verdict and was sentenced and sent to prison. My dad hired the best lawyers in town, and they did all they could to help Becca out. As a result, she was only sentenced to 1 year of community service. As for me, I told Emily everything about who I was and about my game nickname. I wrote to her that she probably would not want to know me after all this, and I deleted my game account. I thought, okay, just let it go. To my surprise, Emily came up to me the next day. She said, "Hi, Giraffe. The witch has missed you." It turned out that Emily figured out who I was after she got my messages from the car trunk. She also apologized and said that she did not want to personally offend me that time 2 years ago. She just tried to produce that bad girl image. But now she broke up with Steve, and she no longer needs to produce that impression. This is how your humble servant Austin, a nerd, is now dating the best-looking girl at school. And yes, we still play computer online games. Did you like my story? What do you think about it? Write your thoughts in the comments and subscribe to the channel.